Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks. We just got a ton of new info today about Update 32, the Deadlands DLC, which will be coming to the PTS on Monday, September 20th. So for this video, I'll go through their combat preview, which has some juicy details about proc sets and capped crit damage, as well as the main takeaways from the new info we got from the Deadlands preview on ESO Live. Let's jump right into it. Greetings. It's about that time again where we have another update coming soon, even though Update 31 just released on consoles last week. With a new PTS update lurking around the corner, the combat team wanted to give you all some deep dives into the spicier stuff coming with this upcoming patch. In the last update, we tried to keep things simpler with the number of changes to help combat the change fatigue that many have reported, but progress cannot sleep for long as we march ever forward to improving the game. Our focus in Update 32 is twofold: improving proc set balance and continuing hybridization improvements from previous updates. These areas are the topics we've seen a significant amount of discussion on in the realms of combat balance, so we're following up to try and get better reins on both. In Update 30, we introduced item proc set scaling, which aimed to lower the ease of access of free damage and healing from them by ensuring you needed a baseline of stats to make the set really stand out. While this did help significantly reduce the overbearing success of tanky builds utilizing damage-oriented sets, it also increased the amount of damage that glass cannon and more offensive-oriented builds did by a reasonable margin. This, while an intentional result, still has the issue of the power available when stacking multiples of these sets and how certain combinations are leading to very binary and unengaging gameplay. To target that issue, we're introducing a new rule set for offensive item sets that have low counterplay. Now, when wearing a set that deals a burst of damage within a 4-second window, it will prevent any other use of these types of sets for 1 second. This is to deny the ability to layer multiple effects into single attacks, significantly reducing burst potential. This rule set will be explained in further detail in the PTS patch notes, and keep in mind we are open to adjusting this along the way. So obviously we'll need to see a little more of the details on this, but I do think it's a step in the right direction. For PvE, you usually aren't stacking enough procs to really be affected by this anyways, and for PvP, it should help a little with getting hit by multiple procs at once, though I'm not sure how much of a difference a 1-second timer will really make. And it doesn't solve multiple people stacking procs either, since it appears as though the cooldown will be based on the user and not on a global level, but I'm not 100% sure on that, and we don't really have all the info, so I won't comment too much further on this, but we'll keep an eye on it in the patch notes coming up. In relation to this, we're also aiming our sights on reining in some of the power creep that's been coming into the game as of late, particularly affecting PvE. The dominance of critical hits in ESO is by no means new, and despite the reduction to the overall sourcing of it, we're still seeing it win out by a significant margin when compared to other stats. Rather than outright nerfing critical chance or potency, damage and healing, and hurting builds that aren't really doing more than we expect, we've decided to move forward with a hard cap to critical damage and healing. It is our hope that this keeps critical chance and potency as viable and powerful stats, but also helps open up other stat and build paths. Much like the penetration stats, these will be important to prioritize up until a point, and from there builds will want to seek out other sources of power. Alright, so in theory, I think this actually sounds pretty good. The idea of building to a capped amount of crit damage and then branching out to other paths seems really interesting and probably a lot healthier for overall build diversity and viability. The big thing this hinges on though is where that cap is going to be and how much damage are we going to lose in optimized trial compositions. I doubt this will have much effect on solo or 4-person content, as it is usually the 12-person trial scenarios that really have access to the plethora of crit damage buffs. So I believe this is the current limit if you manage to be on a Nightblade and stack every buff available in the game. Obviously there's some other PvP type of sets that aren't listed here, but in a reasonable scenario that you could possibly build to, I think this is probably the max, but not really a very likely scenario. But something more along these lines is definitely pretty common to see in PvE situations. So I'm really curious to see where they will set that cap. If it is set too low, you're gonna really start eliminating the usefulness of things like Khajiit or Nightblade passives. So it seems like maybe the 125 to 150% spot would probably be a fair range and would still allow for some flexibility with passives to build in different ways rather than render those passives useless in some scenarios. I would be a little concerned if we see it in the 100% range for the cap, but hopefully there is plenty of time to work out the details and give feedback before it goes live. So another point on this paragraph here, while I'm not necessarily against fighting power creep, it does seem as though the Dungeon and Trial team and the combat team might not be aligned in their visions. For example, in the hard modes of the newest trial, Rock Grove, there are some pretty nasty DPS checks on the first and the last boss. On the first boss, the DPS check comes into play if you want to be able to do the encounter without suffering any deaths on the team, as the cleansing pools around the room close off and you need to be able to kill the boss fast enough before too many people have been poisoned and are taking too much damage from that poison to stay alive. And the last boss just has a flat DPS check where the room will eventually fill with lava if you aren't fast enough. Both of these DPS checks are pretty high and seem to be made with the current power levels in mind. As it is now, there aren't very many groups that are able to even clear the final boss on hard mode, much less go for that trifecta no death hard mode speedrun achievement. So we have one team deciding that they're going to design these encounters around optimized elite level DPS, and the other team saying that DPS is a little out of hand and trying to combat the power creep. I think this could end up creating a larger wedge between the teams that will be able to clear the new content and those that can't. I'm sure your uber elite groups will still be able to get through just fine, but those that were just on the cusp may find this a bit frustrating to deal with. At the end of the day though, we have no idea what the cap is going to end up at and how much it will even affect overall group damage, but just something to consider, and it would be nice to see the combat balance and dungeon encounter teams working a little more closely on decisions like this. Alright, moving on to tie things up in the proc set and critical topics for this update, we're also making a fairly significant adjustment that we hope will prevent the previously mentioned changes from becoming too out of hand. Proc sets that scale with your weapon or spell damage, magicka, or stamina will now once again be able to critically strike in update 32. By doing this, in addition to reducing the burst potential when stacking these sets and limiting the amount they can critically strike for, we hope to give these sets some much needed love in PvE situations where they've struggled to maintain viability after the removal of their ability to critically strike in ye years of old. There will be additional balance adjustments to these values to try and prevent them from becoming the best in slot, and we'll have rules on which ones can and cannot crit, so keep your eyes peeled for the list and details in the PTS patch notes. So this is something I've been saying we needed for a while, though my suggestion was to have them crit in PvE but not be able to crit in PvP. Seems like they went a little different route, but on the PvE side of things, this definitely seems like it could shake things up a bit. I'm a little nervous to see that they are adding in a bunch of rules about what can and can't crit and adjusting lots of values. I just hope it's pretty straightforward and easy to know which ones are performing in what way, and not just a big confusing mess similar to the current list of no proc sets that can work in Cyrodiil. It is a little bit annoying to have to dig through forum posts to figure out how different things work in the game and what I can use here or there, so I'm just hoping for some good tooltips on these sets that make it easy to understand. On that note, having the tooltip to also state whether the set works in no proc campaigns or not would be really nice. Maybe just a little icon or something even. But I have a feeling that we're going to see adjustments to sets like Reliquin, as having that in its current form and also able to crit would probably be a little too much. Probably way too much. But my big takeaway is that I hope matched two-piece monster sets are at least worth running over mismatched ones now. I know a lot of times we have mythics and only one monster piece on, but for those other scenarios, it would be nice if the damage from stuff like Alambris or Selene wasn't outdone by simply having another piece with crit on it slotted. But we will certainly dig deep into that on the PTS. Aside from these changes and the usual bug fixing and less flashy global adjustments, like some long overdue Dragonite love, we have one more big change coming this update. So let me stop here real quick. Thank you, God. Another thing I've been begging for. Obviously no details here, but it looks like DKs will finally be getting a little bit of love. I think their passives really need the most work, but hopefully this pushes them up to the rest of the pack for DPS. As mentioned before, hybridization improvements have been a push in many updates ever since Champion Point 2.0 was released in update 29, and it's something we're continuing with as we see a lot of the good it does. ESO has always tried to hold itself to the mantra of play the way you want, but a lot of our stats and ability calculations actively push against this concept in ways we find less than ideal. In update 32, we're taking the next big approach to change the concept of what a hybrid is by making all item sets grant hybrid stats. This means sets that grant weapon damage will now grant weapon and spell damage, spell penetration will be physical and spell critical will be weapon and spell, etc. With this change, we hope to open up builds to new abilities and ideas and make the game more digestible and understandable to newer players, and empower you with your choices when creating your dream build. Well, it looks like ZOS is planning to keep me very busy this patch. This is really going to turn everything on its head. There are so many great sets out there that were previously just for STAM or just for MAG that will now be great on both. The possibilities are going to be a little overwhelming for a while, I think. The theory crafting gears have already started turning, but I would be shocked if we have figured everything out by the time the patch goes live. I'll definitely be working hard to come up with new setups for both MAG and STAM builds, and I can't wait to see all the new viable options that we have to work with. Sets like Zogvin and Reliquin working for Magicka users, Sororia and Basai on STAM builds. It could be a little nutty for a bit while we get adjusted to everything, but definitely one of the things I'm most excited for in the coming DLC. Our focus with this upcoming PTS update will be heavily concentrated on ensuring that the item set proc adjustments with critting and prevention release in a way that improves the gameplay balance, and will be keeping a close eye on those topics. We look forward to seeing the myriad of discussions that pop up, as we know there will be much to theory craft and mull over. Thanks for reading, and see you in Tamriel. Thank you, Gilliam, for the write-up, and I'm super excited to dive into this and hoping this makes a better ESO overall. So that's it for the combat preview, but we also got a lot of news from the ESO Live about some of the other changes coming to the game. So we did find out that there will be 3 new Mythics coming, though we didn't get any details on that yet, but pretty stoked to see what those will be. And then next up, and probably the thing I'm most excited about in the Deadlands update, either that or the hybrid stats, we are finally getting smart loot drops. Gone are the days of running content endlessly and having RNG continually screw you over. Your loot drops will now work hand in hand with your item set collections, and you won't receive duplicate drops of an item until you have filled out your collection. So essentially, when you get a drop, the game will look at your sticker book and pick out an item that you don't have yet. This means if you are having bad luck, eventually the item you need will be the only item you have left to collect and will be a guaranteed drop at that time. This is such a nice quality of life adjustment. They did mention that sourcing will still be a factor though, so enemies that only drop certain gear types won't drop other pieces outside of that loot table that you need. So for example, in a dungeon, you still need the final boss for weapons and won't have them drop from earlier bosses just because you've already filled out your body gear. So all the body pieces should be pretty easy to collect now, and then jewels and weapons may still take quite a few runs to get what you need, but just having that hard cap there now is so nice. It really motivates me to want to run all sorts of different content, knowing the drops I'll get will pretty much only be drops that I need. And they said once you collect all of them, it will then go back to random like it is currently on the live servers. There are a few exceptions to this curated RNG rule. Treasure chests will still drop only random pieces. Getting random drops from trash mobs will also still only produce random pieces and not take your sticker book into account. Purchasing containers, such as the ones that have monster set shoulders or Cyrodiil or Imperial City containers, will also be random still. But overall, wow, such a good change. It looks like I'll finally be able to grab that Burning Spellweave Inferno staff that has been eluding me all this time. So another addition to the game that I've been hearing some mixed opinions about is the Armory. So this is essentially a loadout saver, similar to what you'd see in other games. It is a furnishing and therefore is accessed in housing. So how it works is you save what you currently have going in your build in this Armory, and that will include your attribute points, your skills, gear, champion points, and even things like curses, whether you're a vampire or a werewolf, and all that can be swapped to instantly at the Armory. The main thing I see this being really nice for is if you have a character where you like to do a lot of PvE and PvP, you could swap back and forth, or if you like to tank and DPS on the same character, you could quickly, with just a press of a button, swap between the full build. So save a lot of time with just the press of one button, which is really nice over how it's currently set up and having to go through and change every single part. They did mention that it does not save your Mundus Stone though, so it does seem like they still want those in-house Mundus Stones to serve a purpose, but overall it will still be much faster to swap between builds than it was before. It will also bypass all the respec costs, so no gold spent at the shrine, no gold spent to redo your CP, and you don't have to continually do the vampire or werewolf quest if you want to go back and forth between being one of those. It all saves directly into the loadout and costs nothing. Now for the negatives. I think the ESO Live was pretty much nothing but big wins all the way through until they got to this part. So the furnishing itself, the Armory, is free. However, that only comes with 2 loadouts. If you want more, they have to be purchased in the Crown Store, up to 10 total. And again, like the outfit system, these are only per character, not per account. So get ready to spend a lot of money if you want several of your characters to be able to swap to several different setups. I just really don't understand why they thought this was a good route. They had everyone on board until this. It should be at a minimum of 4 slots for free, I think. That would let you have heals, DPS, tank, and a PvP setup ready to go. Then if people wanted to go beyond that, great, they could pay for some more, or at a bare minimum, at least the extra slots be account wide, not per character. It just really rubs me the wrong way for them to make it only 2 slots and the upgrades purchased are just for that character. Really hope they decide to make some additional adjustments to those numbers before this goes live, and I think they'll see a lot more positive feedback about this overall if they do. But sadly, the cash requirements don't stop there with this new feature. They are also introducing an Armory Assistant that will work similarly to the Banker and Merchant. This can be summoned and let you change your builds on the fly. So maybe you are DPSing a dungeon and your tank drops, you could pull out your Armory Assistant, swap to tank, and continue on, assuming you had all the right pieces on your character and all that. Obviously, this could still be done if people wanted to wait a sec while you ported home and then ported back, but this definitely saves a bit of time with it. Not too bad, but still, you know, this new feature introduced and automatically they're like, okay, now buy stuff for it. It just kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit. They did mention that it will not be able to be used in PvP instances and also will not be able to be used in time runs. So in veteran arenas and trials, once you go through the door to start the timer, this assistant cannot be summoned. Sorry, console players, if you were thinking this might be your dressing room solution for swapping gear in trials, this isn't really set up to be that. It is set up to save a lot of time when swapping between very different roles or setups though, and I think it will be very nice for that, especially for those that like to often go back and forth between PvE and PvP activities. So really, I think it's a cool new feature. I just would like to see it tweaked a bit to not be so limiting without having to spend extra money on it. Only the 2 slots to start, and each upgrade to further slots only applying to 1 character is just not good enough in my opinion, but we'll see what happens. I've also been seeing some PvP players say that they'd like to see an armory added at the home base in Cyrodiil, so you don't have to completely leave Cyrodiil, and I think that would be a great idea as well. I don't want to end on a negative note. I know there's a lot of good stuff here too, so I'll end with a few more cool things that they're doing. Like I said, most of this is really great and everyone was hyped, but this one particular thing kind of derailed it for some people. So moving on, another small change that console players may like is that Skyshards will now be added to your map when you are in a certain proximity to them. They didn't say how close you need to be for them to show up on your map, but one thing they did mention is that if you have fully completed a zone, your zone guide will actually point you directly to any Skyshards that you are missing. So this isn't a PC add-on replacement for running around and grabbing Skyshards easily, but still an improvement, especially for completionists out there. And along these same lines, they'll also be adding active incursions to your map as well. These are the Dolmens, Harrowstorms, and other similar world events. So now in the same sort of way the active dragons show up and elsewhere, you'll be able to see on your map which world event in your zone is currently active. Next up, when you buy something off a guild trader, it will now immediately show up in your mail. No longer will you need to relog or rezone to get it to show up. So nice little quality of life improvement there. For graphical and performance updates, 20 and 30 series GPUs will now be able to utilize DLSS, which to sum up pretty much allows your computer to dynamically scale the resolutions to optimize for the best performance. The way that it scales it will technically be a lower resolution than you may be running, but it will still look as though you're running at the high resolution and you will get better performance. To the sharp eye, you may be able to notice a little difference in the quality, but I played with this setting on in Cyberpunk 2077. I thought it looked great and it allowed me to really crank up all the graphics settings on my 2080 Ti, and I still got really great frames per second. Another new tech that they're introducing is actually a brand new anti-aliasing from NVIDIA, and ESO will be the first game to use it. This is called DLAA, which is Deep Learning Anti-Aliasing. So here's Rich Lambert describing it.
You won't get a performance boost out of this, but what you get is just absolutely incredible anti-aliasing with this. It's unbelievable. And for those that don't know what aliasing is or anti-aliasing is, it's basically those jaggies you see on a lot of the images on the straight lines and whatnot. Mm-hmm. That's just an artifact of converting images from super high resolution to lower resolution. Your video card has to work really hard to smooth out all those lines and edges. And so this new tech that NVIDIA came up with just is unbelievable. Like it's crazy how good it is. So.
All right, that's going to do it for this video. Let me know what you guys think about the changes. What do you guys think would be a good percent for the hard cap for crit damage? And what would make you happier with the armory? I want to give a big thanks to my current Patreon supporters. If you'd like to see how you can help support the channel through Patreon, I'll have a link in the description below. And a special thanks to Nicholas, Simon, Privy League Guild on PlayStation's EU server, Cougar is Bay and the Cougar City Guild, Stridig, Delta, the Order of War Guild, Iffy, and my wonderful wife. Thank you all so much for stopping by. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.